The match that was played during a war nobody knew was happening. It was just a football match. At least that's what the crowd thought. Tens of thousands of fans packed into the stadium. Flags waved. Chants echoed through the stands. Vendors sold food in the aisles. Everything looked normal. But nobody knew that within days, two countries would be at war. And that is the part of the story most people never hear. Most football fans know the name the Football War. They know it involved El Salvador and Honduras. Some even know it happened after a World Cup qualifier. But almost nobody knows what was really happening behind the scenes. Because football didn't actually cause the war. It only gave it a name. The story begins in 1969. For years, El Salvador and Honduras had been locked in growing tension. The problem wasn't football. It was land, migration, and politics. Thousands of Salvadorans had moved into Honduras looking for work and farmland. As conditions worsened, anger grew on both sides of the border. Then football entered the picture. The two countries were drawn against each other in qualifying for the 1970 World Cup. 3 matches. That was all. But the timing couldn't have been worse. The first game was played in Honduras. El Salvador lost. The next morning, newspapers reported that an 18-year-old Salvadoran girl named Emilia Bolaños had taken her own life after being devastated by the defeat. The story shocked the nation. Her funeral was broadcast on television. Government officials attended. Even the national team was there. Suddenly, a football match felt like something much bigger. Then came the second game. This time, it was played in El Salvador. El Salvador won, and things turned ugly. The Honduran team was harassed throughout their stay. Fans threw objects. Their bus was damaged. Security had to escort them out of the country. Meanwhile, violence spread beyond the stadium. Salvadoran migrants living in Honduras became targets. Homes were attacked. Families fled. People died. Now football was no longer just football. Everything came down to one final match, a winner-takes-all playoff in Mexico City. The atmosphere was electric. The stakes felt enormous. And when the final whistle blew, El Salvador had won. Their players celebrated. Their fans celebrated. But nobody knew what was coming next. Just 4 days later, on July 14th, 1969, Salvadoran forces crossed into Honduras. War had begun. The conflict lasted only about 100 hours. But in those 4 days, around 2,000 people died. Tens of thousands lost their homes. And suddenly, newspapers around the world had a headline. The Football War. It was the perfect story. 2 countries play football. 1 country wins. A war begins. Simple. Except it wasn't true. Historians who studied the conflict later reached the same conclusion. The real causes had been building for years. Land shortages, economic inequality, political tensions, mass migration. The football matches didn't create those problems. They simply became the spark that ignited them. But the nickname stuck, and that nickname changed how people remembered the conflict. Instead of asking why 2 countries had reached a breaking point, many people reduced the entire tragedy to a football result. A complex human disaster became a strange sports story. That is why this story still matters today. Because football didn't start the war. Football gave the war a name. And sometimes a name can be powerful enough to rewrite history. Somewhere in an archive, there is a photograph of the El Salvador team celebrating their victory in Mexico City. They are smiling, arms around each other, proud of what they achieved. They have no idea that the match they just won will forever be linked to a war. They think they have just won a football game. History had other plans. And more than 50 years later, people still remember it as the Football War. Not because football caused it, but because football became the story everyone chose to remember.